This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, and you are listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast. I'm your co-host, Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer here at the Diocese of Arlington. If you haven't yet, please go to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, whichever system you use to listen to this podcast, and please write a review. We've been seeing reviews there, and it's very helpful. That feedback is really good for us so that we can always improve the podcast and other digital media here at the Diocese. I welcome our host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, how are you?
Thank you, Billy. Great being with you again.
So what have you been up to lately?
Well, it's a great joy to travel throughout our diocese, and so certainly we've been celebrating the beautiful sacrament of confirmation throughout our diocese. I've been able to do some school visits and parish visits, and some diocesan events have been exciting. So that's always a great joy. Whenever I'm out visiting and meeting our faithful, it's always a blessing.
I saw one of those moments of great joy recently when you were able to announce 3 new Monsignors for the diocese. Talk a little bit about that.
It was a great joy. Monsignor is a chaplain to His Holiness, part of the papal household, and it's a title, it's an honor given to certain priests. Pope Francis has emphasized that the title of Monsignor should be given to pastors who really have, in their priestly ministry, demonstrated great love for the Lord, His church, and the faithful. He asked that the title be reserved for those who are over 65.
And that's a new development.
That's a new development. That's something new to Pope Francis. I guess he wants to make sure the veterans are honored, those who have done this for a long period of time. And so we were very blessed. I consulted with the priests before recommending names, and the priests were very much helpful in honoring or selecting the names to be submitted to the Holy See. But ultimately, it's the decision of the Holy See. I only make a recommendation. But we were so happy for Monsignor Vella and Monsignor Cregan and Monsignor Krempa. And, you know, when you get an honor, none of these priests are looking for a worldly title or honor. They're really not. They're very humble men. But I try to convey to them that this is, when they're honored, the priesthood is honored. Their brother priests are honored. All the faithful they have served throughout the years are honored. It's a way to lift up the priesthood. And so it's with great joy that I made that announcement.
And it's an announcement that's far less frequent now. You know, it was maybe more common in times past, but it was a surprise for so many, because some people we saw on social media were saying, I didn't think they did this anymore. They thought it was kind of, done away with altogether. But because you have to be 65 or older, it really does kind of shrink the pool of possible candidates. And then, like you said, a bishop has to feel really confident that these are the men that, the Holy Father would agree when they read their priestly life and what they've done. And
it's particular to any local church, any diocese, any bishop. It's not something that's mandated. It's the option of the local church. But again, I did this with consultation with our priest council and our priests, and I was very happy at our priest Lenten day of prayer to make this announcement.
And speaking of consultation, recently we had a communication survey. So we put this out, well, it's becoming less recent, but it was late last year. We had this communication survey, and we were soliciting feedback from the faithful about a lot of things, both digital media, but also the Arlington Catholic Herald, as well as their website and other things. What were some of the takeaways that you really gleaned when we went through the results of that survey?
Well, first of all, I was grateful that so many people responded.
Almost 7,000 people.
Yeah, and people of different ages. And so, when we go out to the faithful seeking input and consultation, that's very serious. We want that input. It's very helpful in making decisions. And so we were very grateful for the people who did respond. And what we learned overall, I think, is that there's no one way to communicate. We don't have to choose. And so there's people who made it very clear to us that the way they receive information or receive news or what gets them excited about learning the faith will vary from one person to another. What was very significant, I think, is in our day and age when you hear so much about the print media is not as useful as it used to be or as welcomed as it used to be. We learned from our survey that our diocesan newspaper, the Catholic Herald, is very appreciated. And it's very much something that many of our faithful encouraged us to continue. And they gave some suggestions, which I thought were very helpful, on how certain parts of the Catholic world could be a little bit more effective in responding to their pastoral and spiritual needs. Basically, providing tools. We want to live our faith. We want to share our faith. Help us to do so. Give us the tools that we need. And certainly they mentioned that what's always helpful too is stories of inspiration of people who are indeed living this faith and teaching this faith. So we gain a lot from that survey, but it did confirm what we know, that it's the duty of the church to use every appropriate means possible, including social media and technology, to get out the good news, to evangelize, to reach as many people as possible, and making sure that part of that emphasis is not just the people who are fully engaged in the life of the church, but maybe people who are somewhat engaged, or maybe people who have even wandered away. Maybe these tools will help to assure them of God's great love.
And for those who are interested in knowing more about the results of the communication survey, I'm authoring an article for the March 15th edition of the Catholic Herald, where I go through some of this data, and also we provide a link where you can kind of comb through in more depth the results, so you can see what people said about different things. Bishop, recently we had the Diocesan Men's Conference. It happens once a year. We had 700 and some odd men join. I heard the main keynote was phenomenal. I heard the other keynote was a little rough.
Yeah, I think his name was Billy Apple.
Bombed big time. It was not good. But what was your one of your main takeaways from that gathering?
Well, first of all, to see close to 800 men together on a Saturday. Think of all the other things they could be doing and the other obligations they have. But for 800 men, and again, men of different ages too, many younger or middle age, to set aside that day, of all the things I could be doing, I'm setting aside this day to be with the Lord and to celebrate my faith. That in itself was inspiring. To see the men there at 7:30 in the morning celebrating the sacrament of penance, seeking God's mercy, was beautiful. And to hear the talks that were given, especially our keynote speaker, which I know we're making available on our social media, talking to the men about how they are called as men to be spiritual fathers through their words and through their example, to live lives of integrity, not to compromise their faith, and not afraid to look different. That was a beautiful talk of the Father Schmitz, who gave the keynote. Don't be afraid to look different. As a follower of Christ, the Beatitudes, the gospel that are gave, it radically transformed the values of the world, and not to be afraid of that. And that's what a true disciple would be. And so I think the day, and then of course we celebrated with Mass. Your testimony about living your faith in the midst of a cross was very helpful, because every man in that conference has some kind of cross. So, and I think the fact that men being together with men is a good thing. Just that we're going to have the women's conference this weekend. It's very good, because living out your faith as an adult man in a world that is demanding, it's very good for them to speak to each other of how you do that. And to, St. Paul says, we are always to help encourage each other in our faith. And when you heard the spirit in the room and the enthusiasm of people leaving, I think we help with God's grace to set them on fire.
So if you would like to listen, for those listening, if you would like to watch or listen to the talks from that day, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Arlington Diocese. You can also go to arlingtondiocese.org. It's on our website. Father Mike Schmitz, the theme of his talk was the marks of a Catholic man. And then my talk was cancer and faith, the spiritual blessings and challenges of physical suffering. So if you're interested in those, you can go there. Also, Bishop Burbidge's homily to those men. You didn't have to be there to appreciate the message, the core message of what Bishop Burbidge said in that homily. And there was a Q&A session at the end that we did as well. Again, all four of those are available on our YouTube channel. And then we'll do a follow-up of the women's conference in our next podcast when that comes. So Bishop, recently, I know one of your favorite things is to visit the schools, to see the kids. There's always this joy and this enthusiasm. Recently you had the 8th grade vocations day where you get to meet with these kids and celebrate Mass. Talk a little bit about what that was and what your message was to those young people.
That's a great tradition in our diocese, this annual vocation day. In fact, Father Stephen Vaccaro, one of our newly ordained, he spoke before the Mass, and he told the 8th graders, guess what? Not too long ago, I was sitting where you were. So here's a newly ordained priest recalling that day. So we gather all the 8th graders from around the diocese, almost 1,100 students, for some testimony talks, Mass, some lunch, some ice cream, and the first thing I help them to see is to remind them they're part of something bigger. They just don't belong to a parish. They belong to a diocese. They belong to the local church, and they got to see that with so many of our priests and sisters spending time with them, and then to spend time together, which was, I think, very helpful and encouraging for them. The basic talk that I mentioned to our 8th graders is everyone in the church that day, no matter what age we were, we all shared the same vocation, the same call to become a saint, to grow in holiness, and that's a task that we live out each day. God will, as they grow older, will give them specific vocations to live out that call. Some in a single life, many to the beautiful vocation of married love, and we talked about that self-sacrificing love that must be part of any vocation, including marriage. And I told them, in God's mysterious plan, some of them right in that church will hear His call to be a priest, to be a consecrated religious, give your whole life in service to the church. And if they are called, it's mysterious. Why me, Lord? But we certainly could tell them it is a life of great joy. I told them, as they discern God's call, is to, first of all, pray. Yeah, and when you pray, not just to talk, but to listen, because God will speak to their hearts, to let other people speak to you. I told them a story about when I was in high school, junior high school. A priest called me over in the middle of the hallway. Michael, have you ever thought about being a priest? Oh, not really, Father. Well, you know what? Would you think about it? I think you'd be a good priest. First time anyone ever said that to me. And from that point on, I could not stop thinking about it. So I told the young people, if your teachers or family members or friends, recognize something in you, just be open to that. And then don't be afraid. None of us are worthy of the call we receive. If God is calling us to a particular vocation in life, He will give us the strength. So I think that's a message messages that are helpful not just to 8th graders, but to anyone discerning their call in life, and to those, in fact, living that vocation. When
did you first really consider or feel like God might be calling you to the priesthood? How old were you? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was junior, senior in high school.
Oh, okay, so yeah.
So I guess like the like the prophets and the disciples, I was typical in resisting and giving all the excuses. Yeah. But you see that throughout sacred scripture. But God is relentless. Like, you get to the point where you just can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
You have to surrender, and you just get to the point where if I don't at least try this, I don't think I'll be happy until to at least say I tried and I found out it was for me or it wasn't for me. So God is relentless. He wins at the end.
And the groundwork is laid before you start feeling that call. I mean, living a life of holiness. People say 8th graders, well, they're not going to be going to seminary anytime soon. But that isn't when you begin talking about the spiritual life that they're called to, that God wants a relationship with them. All of those things, it seems, really build to the moment when you discern the radical life that God's calling to. Is it the radical life of married life? Maybe.
Right.
Maybe it's to religious life or the priesthood. But if you haven't really engaged in that relationship until then, it's going to be very hard to properly discern.
And, vocations are rooted in family life. And so to all of our parents who are listening, I'm sure you're doing this, and I thank you and commend you for that. The encouragement that you give to your son or daughter, that, you want them to be open to what God wants. Not what you want for your child, but help them understand what does God want for you, and to assure them that whatever that vocation is, that you would support them, even if it is giving your entire life to the church. I sometimes tease our parents a little bit when I give my little vocation talk at confirmations or whatever, and I tell them, let's make sure, that we are praying for vocations, that this diocese will have more priests and more sisters. And everyone is shaking their head. Yes, they agree. And I said, but I want you to pray that it might be your son or daughter. Well, they get all nervous then. So I want to keep their heart open to that also.
Yes, someone's child, but not my child. St. Patrick's Day is just around the corner. How are you going to celebrate?
Burbidge is an Irish name, isn't it? It doesn't sound Irish, does it?
It doesn't, no.
I know. But my grandparents, my dad's parents, were both from Ireland. In fact, as a child growing up, I had a very difficult time understanding my grandfather because he had such a strong Irish brogue.
Yeah.
And my grandmother's name was Annie Farrell. So there you go.
That ain't Irish, nothing is.
Yeah, so we were very Irish. And, one of the things I always remember celebrating St. Patrick's Day, again, it goes back with my dad and me. We would have in our city where I grew up the annual St. Patrick's Day parade. And I always remember marching with my dad in the parade. Isn't that a great memory? Just celebrating, marching together, just walking together. It's just beautiful. And so for St. Patrick's Day, I will be celebrating Mass actually the weekend before St. Patrick's Day, our new Basilica, St. Mary's, followed by a wonderful St. Patrick Day party in which they have some great entertainment, including Irish dancing and that delicious Irish food of ham and cabbage, corned beef and cabbage.
It's a very penitential celebration, right? But that celebration at St. Mary's is well known.
Right.
I think it's kind of a community thing.
Yeah,
a lot of people come out of the woodwork.
They really do. And, it's, of course, we celebrate. But as we know, St. Patrick was a missionary. And he was, known as the evangelization works and efforts and his care of the poor. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage our families, it's St. Patrick's Day. It's fun. It's a good celebration. But I would also say, well, maybe there's something we could do together as a family to help the poor. Wouldn't that be a great way to honor St. Patrick?
I think so, especially with so much of St. Patrick's Day has become kind of secularized a bit. You're bringing back the religious and reminding our children this is what St. Patrick's Day is about. It's commemorating this wonderful saint, and if we could embody some of those virtues, how much better would it be for us?
Right.
If nothing else.
Exactly.
All right, moving to another topic, the Supreme Court recently declined to take up DACA, and this is a topic of one of our recent podcasts. For those that want to listen to that, you can go back. So the Supreme Court declined to take up DACA until an appeals court hears the case first. So right now, DACA's kind of got this uncertain future while it's being worked out in the judicial branch somewhere. But there was recently a call to contact your legislators, tell them that you support this. You made that call yourself. Talk a little bit about this issue. Why is it important to you, and why is it important that people really support the effort that the U.S. bishops are calling us to? Right,
and this time in between, as you mentioned, is a source of great stress and anxiety for those impacted, living really in fear. And so, as we mentioned in our last podcast, that we believe that our country needs to protect and secure its borders. We understand that. But we also talk about the dignity of the human persons and think that there is a compassionate way. There must be a compassionate way for these young people who are such beautiful people in our diocese. I've met so many of them and speak with them who are living in fear. They didn't choose to come to our country. They came here as young children, a year old, 2 years old, and this is the only life that they know. There just seems to be, to me, a reasonable, a prudential, a sound way of doing both. And I think if we have people with good minds and desires to serve and prayer, I think we can find the right way to do this. but we really have to speak up for the dignity of the human person, of family, and encourage the support of these young people. If you go to the sharejourney.org, it's a series of videos published last week about Dreamers. It's part of the Conference of Bishops work. And you can learn more about DACA, hear some interesting stories. But, I just pray that this is not a political agenda issue, but it's focused on persons. If we're focused on persons, we'll do the right thing.
And families. And you mentioned, you're balancing goods here. We can do both. And that really gets to the idea that this is a prudential issue. Obviously, we have the obligation to welcome our neighbor, but what does that exactly look like? And we got a question recently, and we'll get into some more questions in a minute, but I think the question kind of gets to this, so I think it would be good if you would be willing to answer this. So Christopher from St. John the Baptist in Front Royal said, the USCCB is strongly advocating the extension of DACA as part of the bishop's broader support for amnesty for illegal or undocumented aliens and for their extended families. Your Excellency, am I bound to adhere to the USCCB's position on DACA with the same religious submission of mind as I am required to adhere to the teaching of Humanae Vitae? And Humanae Vitae, for those who don't know, is actually the celebration of the 50th anniversary of that is coming up here in July. Talks about the dignity of the human person, talks about natural family planning and God's intent for love within the family unit, those kinds of things. So he's saying, we've got this fundamental teaching regarding sexuality, and then we've got other issues like DACA. How do we balance these out? Do I have to believe in them the same? How do you respond to it? Because that's something that we've seen come up in other questions.
It's a good question. It's an appropriate question. And, there are fundamental teachings of our faith, commands and mandate of the gospel that are fundamental and that, require our full adherence. There are some prudential issues where we hold true to the belief, sacredness of life, dignity of the human person. How that is implemented in light of specific issues and particular laws, that's where there is some room. There is room for discussion. There's room for debate. And so there are certain areas or issues where there is that difference, and I think that's what the question refers to. But we don't need to separate. If it's either a fundamental issue or prudential issues, and I just deal with the fundamental issues. No, we deal with both. It's not either or in a sense. And so in this prudential issue of the DACA situation, how do we uphold a fundamental belief that all persons are created in God's image, deserve dignity and respect, and enact that in a society where laws impact it. And so there is room in that area for debate and discussion. Pray is always respectful. Pray is always, again, focused on the person.
And because DACA exists now, it's the ripe opportunity. And if we're going to help immigrants, yes, there's lots of issues that we need to be concerned about, right to life issues, abortion, marriage, religious liberty. But this is one where we have opportunity,
right,
to actually take action now. And that's, when you would call people to email their legislators and make phone calls, I wouldn't necessarily say stop doing that. That was just one day where we really wanted to concentrate the effort and show our legislators where we stand on the issue. Right. And I remember you saying that when you called one of them, they said, "We know why you're calling."
It was funny. Yeah, it was one of the representatives' office. I said, "Hello, this is Bishop Burbidge calling." "Yes, we know, and we are. He supports your position."
Again, for those who want to look a little bit more at the issue and see some of the faces of the people we're talking about, the stories and the families, go to sharejourney.org. That's a site of the U.S. Conference of Bishops where you can learn more about this issue and meet some of these people. Digitally, at least. There is another call-in effort that the USCCB is calling us to engage, and it's for conscience protection. Bishop, could you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. It's a statement by Cardinal Dolan, Timothy Dolan of New York, who is also the chair of our Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Pro-Life Activities,
right, and
Archbishop Kurtz, who is the chair of the USCCB's Committee for Religious Liberty, which I'm very honored to be part of that committee. They have urged the faithful to flood Congress with emails and phone calls asking for the enactment of the Conscience Protection Act as part of the 2018 funding bill and to pray for this outcome. Now, there's two key points here, Billy. It's wrong for government to force Americans to violate their deeply held convictions about the sanctity of human life.
Exactly.
That's what we're saying.
Right.
And the other is that doctors and nurses should not be driven from the healing professions because they are unwilling to participate in abortions.
Right.
And so these men and women who give their lives to heal, to protect, to save life, and that commitment is consistent with the refusal to perform abortions, shouldn't be driven out from the profession to which they've been called. And so I am asking everyone, again, this is something we do, it's ongoing, but the Monday, March the 12th, it has been set aside as a day. And so we'll put that out on social media too. We talked recently about the Virginia Catholic Conference, hoping that people are signing up to receive notices from our Virginia Catholic Conference. And there you get the phone number and the email addresses of your legislators. It makes it it's very user-friendly.
Yeah, so you just go to vacatholic.org, and there's this tool there where you can figure out who your legislator is if you don't know. But you can also just quickly get the contact information of your U.S. senators and other legislators as well. So if you would like to participate, we would encourage you to do so. March 12th, Monday, March 12th, we're advocating for the Conscience Protection Act, and that's part of the funding bill. And something that a lot of people don't realize is passing a bill is only half the battle. Funding it's the other half.
Right.
And a lot of times the funding doesn't go through and bills just kind of sit flat and they never actually have an impact because they don't get funded. So it's important that we emphasize those 2 points. But again, if you go to vacatholic.org, you can get the contact information. And if you go to usccb.org, you can learn more about the Conscience Protection Act and what it is that they're trying to encourage people to participate in. So, Bishop, are you ready to dig into some questions from the faithful?
Let's do some questions.
All right.
Yes, at the men's conference, I said they took it easy on us. They threw us some softballs. So I don't know if we have softballs here tonight or maybe some curveballs to hit.
Very good. So we have Jody from St. Elizabeth Ann Seton in Lake Ridge. She said, our son is studying abroad in Wales, and the parish bulletin there said that the church has never mandated abstaining from meat on Fridays, but has only suggested it as a sacrifice. The idea was that it was never actually mandated. Was surprised to hear, and I wonder about the accuracy of it.
Yeah, no, abstaining from meat is expected of Catholics unless it's detrimental to their health and based on the guidelines of age that we were given. But again, health is always important. So I would, encourage her son to do exactly that. And as Fridays throughout Lent are meatless. And Good Friday would be also a day of fast and abstinence, as Ash Wednesday was.
Right. And this almost, I can understand when people ask these questions, it's good to know, what do I have to do? But it's a great exercise. It's not about being, forced to do it or do we have to do it? It's about this is a good exercise of self-denial. This is, healthy for the spiritual life. And of course, if you have a medical condition, you might need to, find another sacrifice to replace it. But I've most of the folks I know appreciate this. It creates this little challenge, this little curveball. What are we making for dinner and how do you do lunch?
It's just a reminder. It's just a reminder that we're in a penitential season and sacrifice and fasting is always good for the soul.
Right. So we had 3 questions on the same topic. So I'm going to address Kathy from Corpus Christi in South Riding, Charles from St. Michael in Annandale, and we got a question from Amy. We don't know her parish. But they all asked the question of altar servers and what is your opinion on having girls serve as female altar servers? And is there a policy here in the diocese about that?
Right. Well, it's the policy and practice that I've inherited here in the Diocese of Arlington is a solid one, and it's in line with what the church allows for. And so there are parishes in our diocese that have only male altar servers, and there are parishes in our diocese that have male and female altar servers. And the church allows for both practices, and it's really a local decision, a parish decision based on the pastoral insights and needs of that local church, and we entrust our pastors to do so with collaboration of his parishioners. I think as you see and our faithful see, I travel throughout the diocese, and there are parishes and schools where I go, and it's all altar boys. That's fine. There are parishes where I go where it's altar boys and altar girls. That's fine too. It's very respectful of what the church asks. The reason some choose to just have altar boys is a kind of a long-standing tradition where the altar boy is seen as really serving the priest, having that close link, that close relationship to the priest, assisting him, serving at the altar. And certainly that idea that young man who is so closely linked and related to the boy may one day consider maybe becoming a priest and serving at the altar as a priest. And so there's a real beauty in that, but at the same time, the church opens up various ministries to women, including altar servers. But it's really wonderful. Like sometimes at a parish where there's just altar boys, it's the same ministry of young girls proclaiming the word of God.
Right.
And singing the responsorial song, which is God's word. What a beautiful ministry that is.
Right.
And so just that openness. But I'm very comfortable in our diocese where it's really the decision of the pastor. And when I celebrate Mass, I respect both.
Very good. So Angela from St. Raymond of Penafort, in Lorton, asked a question about how politics is often separating itself from God, trying to push God out of politics. And she says, how do we as Catholics balance our responsibility for activism with leaving space for God's silence, kind of the action of the church as well as kind of the contemplative of the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is an activism required. We can't just put our faith on the back shelf or keep it personal and private. We're called as followers of the Lord to bring our faith into the public arena. And so activism is required. And that activism can take different forms. It can take calling, writing, elected officials. And that has an impact, as we discussed the last time. We learned that those emails and those phone calls are counted. It can be public witness, like we do at the March for Life, or as we pray outside of abortion clinics. That's a beautiful activism. But in the end, we have to entrust all what we do to God's providential care. And so we do our part. We give our efforts, but then we do say, Lord, in the end, I'm entrusting this to you, offering this prayer for your divine assistance.
Kateri, also from St. Raymond of Penafort in Lorton. I just took these as they came in, folks. There's no preferential treatment here. But what are your tips for having empathy while maintaining the integrity of faith, especially with those who disagree with the faith? Right.
And I think that we never compromise who we are, right? And we never lose our passion, and we never compromise what we believe. But we know that there will always be people who do not accept what we believe and who outright dismiss what we believe. And so that's a good point. So where's the empathy? The empathy is recognizing that person as a child of God, as a brother and sister, and understanding that we do not see that person's heart. We don't know what the issues are and what's going on. Only God does that. Many times when, people are, really strong in their argument or disagreement with an issue, sometimes it's really not the issue that is the real source of the resentment or anger or whatever. Sometimes this is something else. So be always open to the fact that we don't understand that the heart or what's going on inside of a person who strongly disagrees with us, and to engage the person respectfully. Be strong in your faith, don't compromise, but be respectful. And you're never going to win over a person with anger or bitterness. Clarity, yes, but always with compassion.
Sometimes it seems like people don't remember what you said; they just remember how you said it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the only reason they might even come back and ask another question.
Yeah, that's very true.
All right, so we had two questions on the issue of gun control and the Second Amendment, and I'll read each because they take different sides of the issue, and you can kind of respond to the topic then. Sam from St. Stephen the Martyr in Middleburg says, in your latest podcast, you mentioned the need to protect the Second Amendment. Isn't the Second Amendment part of the problem with all these mass shootings and everyday gun violence in our country? Mike from St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception in Fredericksburg says, do you agree that getting rid of the Second Amendment is not the answer to our problems, but instead raising our children in a moral and stable background? And then he talks about the impact of drugs, helping kids with attention and those kinds of things, how those might have an impact as well. So you've got one saying, isn't it part of the problem? The other saying, isn't it deeper? What would be your response to that?
Yeah, well, raising our children in a moral and stable environment, teaching reverence and respect is key. That's the key to a healthy and a strong and respectful society. And so absolutely, that's something that we must be doing. And because, the lack of that leads to some of the darkness, some of the evil, some of the criminal behavior that we see. So absolutely. At the same time, the Second Amendment is part of our Constitution. But I think we've reached a point in society where we're saying, okay, but yes, we do have a right to protect ourselves. But given the realities of the year 2018, where are the boundaries? Where are how is that best interpreted in this day and age, given all that we know and all that we have seen? And so this is where debate comes to play. I don't think any one of us has the answer, but I would encourage a healthy, respectful debate among ourselves and among our elected officials to see, okay, is there a way, certainly of protecting the Second Amendment, but understanding that there are some action steps that have to be taken, because we can't accept what we have witnessed, the horrific killings and all that we have witnessed. And I was just spending a day with our high school students yesterday, and you see how this impacts them. They're living in fear. And so we also, as a diocese, must be taking a look, at our own schools and safety and procedures. And although we would like them to just continue as they always have been, well, we may have to take some steps that make things look a little different, and so how to maintain that balance and preserve the rights that belong to people. There's no easy answer, and we're face to face with evil in our midst. We have to acknowledge it. It's in our midst, but we know in the end, it's what we're celebrating at Lent as we get closer to Holy Week. In the end, our Lord triumphed over the evil. So hopefully everything that we're discussing, and as a country and as a diocese and all try to deal with this issue, it's rooted in the guidance and the power that the Lord will give us, the one who proved victorious over evil. And
one thing that you had said that really seemed to resonate with people, especially on social media, in the last podcast where you mentioned this issue, was that how we talk about this issue can say as much about us as what resolutions we come to or what decisions we make, and that the respectful dialogue,
right,
and not assuming that the other person doesn't care about children or is frivolous with safety, that no, we've got to respect and assume goodwill until we know otherwise in the other person.
Yeah, even my listening on on television of others, some with expertise, some elected officials talking about these issues, it is kind of wonderful to see some of the ideas being proposed and some of the suggestions and recommendations coming forth. I'm thinking to myself, would it not be great if some of these things could come together? But you got to be willing to listen. No one person has the answer. If we did, it would certainly be implemented, but we don't. It's a very difficult and sensitive situation. But together we probably can come up with the answer.
So when we have topics like, gun control and immigration, a lot of stress in society, a lot of different issues, and you've got a very demanding schedule. So Elena, we don't know her parents, but Elena asks, how do you recommend staying positive? And she says, and then how can an enthusiastic, aspiring liturgist earn a spot on the Walk Humbly team? There's not much team here. It's pretty much just a couple of us. But how do you recommend staying positive, especially with what we see in the public, but also just our own lives are so busy?
Right. Yeah. So much demand, right? So many pressures, stress. I just see what some of our parents, our family members do every day. It's incredible. Every single day, the work responsibilities, the family responsibilities, the tasks, the demands. It's true in the life of my brother priests and all too. We all have that. But I think that's a good question, how to stay positive, because I think a genuine joy, not a giddiness or anything like that, but a genuine joy is important. It reflects that we're believers. When we can, in the midst of all the demands and struggles and challenges, reflect a serenity and a genuine joy, it shows and it reflects that we have a trust and a confidence and a power beyond ourselves in God. And so in our own lives, the more we deepen that reliance on God, then I think externally that joy, that serenity will be reflected. I certainly notice in my own life, and maybe our listeners will notice the same, if that connectedness to God is not as strong as it needs to be, I feel it. I see it in myself that, okay, I see a little tension I'm feeling, and I'm probably showing that stress to others. Not good. So I think the way you remain positive is that you wake up each day, you see it as God's gift, because it wasn't guaranteed, right? Today wasn't guaranteed. It's God's gift to us. You have the gift of life. You have the gift of faith. You have the gift of special people in your lives, unique talents and gifts. Have a heart that's grateful for the blessings that are around you, and trust in the promise that there's nothing you're going to face this day that you'll have to face alone. God's Spirit is with you, and if you believe that and you have to call upon that help too, and then you'll find yourself being just joyful and stressful. I always say we talk about our own stress, but I think as priests, I think as bishop, as parents, co-workers, friends, we have to make sure we're not contributing stress to other people.
Right.
And if we're all like tense and just bundled nerves and agitated and all that stuff, then we're adding to people's stress instead of relieving it. So it's a great question. It's a daily challenge for all of us.
So for those that want to send in questions, we would encourage you to do so. Just info@arlingtondiocese.org. You can also comment. We'll post, send us your questions on social media. You can also reply to those. But if you want to email it in, just email info@arlingtondiocese.org. We just ask that you provide your first name and your parish. You don't have to provide your parish, but if we like to just kind of show where these questions are coming in and kind of let the parishes be represented here. All right, so two last topics, a little lighter than some of the stuff we just went through, but March Madness is upcoming here. And so who are you pulling for? Are you predicting any upsets?
I love that tournament, March Madness. It's always fun. Yeah, you're going to get me in trouble here, though, aren't you?
I like to set you up right before the end.
You are going to get me in trouble. So I'll give an explanation then. Maybe that will get me off the hook a little bit.
Probably not, but go ahead.
So in the three dioceses I lived in, I have a favorite team.
Okay.
So I was born and raised, as you know, in Philadelphia, and I went to Villanova for graduate school. So I'm definitely a Wildcats fan, Villanova.
All right.
I'm pulling for them.
How do you think they're going to do?
I think they're looking very strong.
Good.
And then I lived in the Diocese of Raleigh for 10 years. And my favorite team, even as a young boy, so I can't get in trouble for this. I don't know why, but as a young boy, I was always a Duke and a Coach K fan. And then when I moved to the Diocese of Raleigh, I got to know Coach K a little bit. What a wonderful Catholic man and great. So I'm definitely a Duke fan. So all my UNC fans back in Raleigh are sure not thrilled to hear me say this right now. And then coming here, it's great to have the number one team in the country, UVA, as in our own state. So I'm pulling for you. So if any one of those teams won, I'd be very happy.
Very good, very good.
Whew, that was a tough one.
Yeah.
And Billy, we referred to the March Madness in one of my WTOP spots.
That's right. Yeah. For folks that might not catch it, or to give them a sneak peek if it hasn't run yet, what was your main message?
Well, yeah, it's a commercial spot that we do, which is great. But my message was that in March Madness, there's so much pressure on those teams that get into the tournament because it's one and done. Right, so you lose one game, you go home. That's
right.
it. And I said in the message, which is true, isn't it great? It's not that way with God. One and done. Can you imagine? We'd all be in trouble, right?
Yes.
So with God, we make a mistake. We commit a sin. It's not one and done. God does not tire of forgiving us. And so it's so important for us, to get back up, to call upon God's mercy, and to begin anew.
Very good. And so we're halfway through Lent. Any advice or thoughts for folks?
Right. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It is.
We're halfway through Lent. Yeah, I think so. We're halfway through Lent, and, I'm sure many of us are saying, I remember the zeal I had on Ash Wednesday, and I remember the promises I made, and it's halfway through, and maybe I just don't have that same zeal, or maybe I didn't keep those promises that I made, or the things I was supposed to give up, or whatever. So I would say, well, it's not too late. This is the Lenten journey.
It's not one and done.
Yeah, it's not one and done. So, regroup. This is the home stretch. The home stretch is really important. So make the home stretch great. This is the final stretch towards Holy Week and the celebration of our Lord's resurrection. So renew the commitment. Don't say, well, I couldn't do it, and give up. Renew the commitment. Go back to what you said on Ash Wednesday, and see this as the home stretch, and cross the finish line stronger than ever.
Very good. So, Bishop, any last thoughts, and then if you would send us off with your blessing.
Sure. I wish, as we do continue this Lenten journey, God's blessings upon all the faithful in this beautiful diocese, and all those listening, that God will give us the strength to leave behind all that is not of God, so that we can become a new creation and live in the peace that only He can give. So continue blessings throughout this Lenten season, dear friends. May God bless you and all those you love, and together may we continue to walk humbly with our God. Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly podcast. Make sure you check out more episodes on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can follow me on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, where I offer spiritual reflections each morning in the gospel and share photos and updates of what is going on in the Diocese of Arlington. Stay up to date with news, event information, inspirational content, and more by subscribing to our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org.